Good morning. Welcome to this month's edition of Oak Hills Regional Community Development Corporation's third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat. As most of you know, my name is Bettina Campbell, and I am the Social Service Coordinator and a Medicaid CHIP Assister with Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation, which is the parent corporation for Healthy Kids Mississippi. And of course, I'm your moderator again today. We have also with us Sister Lottie Miner, who serves as the project director for Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation, and as always, our ever-trusting Thomas Robinson, who is our technology and metrics director. We recognize our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our executive director, Dr. Michael O. Miner. In addition to this Zoomcast, we are restreaming today's webinar on the Oak Hill Regional CDC and the Healthy Kids Mississippi Facebook pages. We want you to feel free to share on your social media pages. One of this month's health observers is the National Heart Health Association's Health Heart Month. So in keeping with that theme, we thought it would be appropriate today to provide you with information that will increase our knowledge and awareness of pediatric heart health. But before we start our presentation, I will again encourage you to please share this webinar on your social media platforms. Then get your paper and your pencil and get ready to write down any questions that you might have as Dr. Macri goes through his presentation. Because I'm sure we're going to learn a lot today. And as I've already told you, our speaker today is Dr. Daniel Macri, who is a pediatric cardiologist at the University of Michigan Mott Children's Health Center. I'm sorry, I have no idea what happened. At the University of Michigan Mott Children's Health Center. And he did his pediatric residency there, but he also had his pediatric cardiology fellowship at the Northwestern University Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. A significant portion of Dr. Macri's work is now in prevention cardiology, where he gets to help patients with risk factors in childhood for potential heart disease later in life, for potential health diseases later in life, such as the blood pressure, high blood pressure, high cholesterol levels, or even obesity in childhood. Dr. Macri also takes care of children who are born with heart defects. He states that his interest going forward is in how to prevent heart disease by heart healthy living, starting at a young age, and educating parents and families on how to best help their children who live heart healthy lives. And so, Dr. You have an awesome task ahead of you. You seem to be doing a wonderful job. Again, we want to thank you for being with us, and we welcome you. And you can now take it over.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's my pleasure to be here today. As she mentioned, please, I'm going to save ample room for questions at the end. So hopefully have the opportunity to answer any questions or concerns that you guys have. But I'm going to try to share my screen here. Just let me know if you can see my my slides here. And can you see my slide there?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Alrighty. So today I'm going to be discussing pediatric heart health, living a heart healthy life, with the goal of hopefully giving some tools and some knowledge for everyone, so that we all have the ability to have an open conversation about tools and resources to help our children live as best of a heart healthy life as we possibly can. And again, my name is Dan Macri, and I'm a pediatric cardiologist. So I trained as a general pediatrician and then specialized in cardiology thereafter. And so I work with kids born with heart defects, but also children who have risk factors for heart disease later in life, such as high blood pressure, or high cholesterol, or obesity in childhood. And so I'll touch on those as we go forward. So first, I just wanted to review what the American Heart Association considers life's essential 8. And life's essential 8 that they identify as sort of the most important factors for living a heart healthy lifestyle Number one is healthy eating, and we'll get into some of the details of breaking down different meal options. Number two is fitness or physical activity. Three is quit nicotine, which essentially is that smoking is a significant risk factor for heart attacks, heart disease. And so trying to have our children avoid smoking in the first place, or if we do have, teenagers or young adults who do smoke, trying to help them quit. Fourth on the list there is sleep. So we know that sleep is very important for long-term cardiovascular health. So if we have sleep apnea or sleep that's less restful than it should be, that can be a risk factor for high blood pressure and heart disease in the long term. And so treating sleep apnea is very important, but also getting an adequate number of hours of sleep per day or per night, I should say, is very important, especially starting at a young age. Losing weight is listed on there as fifth. Obviously I would say more maintenance of a healthy weight is probably how I would word that. And so I'll sort of give some ideas, from a meal perspective in terms of healthy eating and physical activity about how that can, impact that sort of fifth value that they discuss. Sixth they have listed there is cholesterol. So we'll get into what cholesterol is, why it's important to get screening for your cholesterol levels, even starting in childhood. And we'll review some of those details today. Seventh on the list is diabetes, which is, largely considered an adult, onset problem the vast majority of the time, but we have seen some type 2 diabetes develop in children, specifically in adolescence at times. And then other times we have type 1 diabetes, which can be more of an autoimmune process that develops early in childhood, but can impact long-term heart health. And then blood pressure. We'll discuss sort of when blood pressure should be checked starting in childhood, the importance of treating high blood pressure if it's present, and we'll go through some of those details today. So starting off with what I think is probably the most important for children on that list for long-term heart health is physical activity. So all children by the American Academy of Pediatrics are recommended to be active for 1 hour per day. That doesn't have to be consecutive 60 minutes. That could be, 20 minutes in, the lunch hour during recess and another, 40 minutes during gym class, or that could be, if they don't have recess or gym, that could be all in an after school activity. However, that is lined up, about 1 hour per day is recommended of primarily movement related physical activity, not just weights. So, things that all sort of count towards that. So brisk walks as a family, jogs, swimming, home exercises, gym class during school or recess, if we're active during those times, team sports, all of those count. Something that really gets our heart rate up and breaks a sweat every day is the primary goal, I would say. Research has shown that kids who are physically active and are active routinely also tend to get better grades in school, as regular physical activity has been shown to improve focus, attention, and can boost positive attitudes. It is interesting, but just want to throw this in there that for adults, the recommendation is about 2.5 hours per week of physical activity. So they have a general awareness in the American Heart Association that adults are a bit busier and have some more responsibilities and children to take care of. And so they lessen that 1 hour a day down to 2.5 hours per week for the adult recommendations of how active we should be and the amount of time we should be active per week. So physical activity ideas, obviously gym class or recess, things that are built into the school structure in the daytime are terrific. And I'm a huge advocate for, regular gym class and regular recess being, part of, elementary school and gym class still being a part of high school, which I know is not the case everywhere. However, gym class or sports teams, all of those activities, they all count towards those goals if you're active during those times. If our children are sitting on the side and talking during recess but not active, then I wouldn't count that time. But those are obviously, times that are great ways to get everyone involved at a young age when we do have that structured activity either within the school day or in after school activities. But it is important, especially here in the Midwest where it's a bit colder than down in Mississippi, to have ideas for home physical activity. So brisk walks as a family, if it's not as safe to walk outside in the neighborhood that we live in, activities that we can do in the home, such as home exercise videos or dancing to music, are great ways to get some activity in the home. the goal, I would say, is to have sort of a routine part of a child's schedule include activity. So if they're not, getting their 1 hour per day at school, then I would say having an active time that's identified by them every day after school is the best way to keep a routine. So whether that's, 4:30 to 5:30 p.m. or whatever it may be, having a set time per day that they know is time that they're, going to have activity, I think is the best way to keep a routine part of the schedule going forward. YouTube has some free home exercise videos. There are many different apps on phones that are, some of which are free, some of which you have to pay for, that have different exercises for children. One that we talk about and like in our clinic is an app on smartphones called Sworkit, or SWORKIT, just one word. And Sworkit does have a component of the app which is for purchase, but a large component of the app is free and available. If you go to the exercise library tab of the app, and then it has different free home exercises and ideas for children, which we can also benefit from as adults, which gives ideas of body exercises we can all do at home without home exercise equipment. If you have exercise equipment at home, obviously that opens up other doors, but all of the exercises that they have listed there are all without home exercise equipment, which is great. Some of those categories being things we're familiar with, maybe like jumping jacks or high knees, or squatting, or doing up downs or fast feet. Basically, getting different creative ways for us to integrate physical activity without having necessarily exercise equipment, that are all terrific ways for us to be active. And so in general, I think being creative, if we're doing activity at home, like dancing to music, which it looks like they're doing on the right there, or like doing some up downs, like it looks like they're doing on the left there, are ways that we can integrate some of that movement related activity while at home, even in maybe some months that are cold, or days that the weather isn't great outside, or if it's not safe for us to be out and about in our neighborhoods, after school hours. Important thing I think to keep in mind is, obviously to try to personalize what we think, our children would enjoy most, because if it's something that they definitely won't enjoy, obviously it's going to be harder to make that a continued part of a routine. So whether that's dancing, or whether that's some of those videos on the Sworkit app, or home exercise videos where people can follow an instructor from YouTube, all of those things might be different ideas depending on what our child might enjoy most. Next on that list was smoking, which obviously, depending on the age of our children, may be something we are concerned about, or starting to become concerned about, or is not even a thought, depending on how young children are. But avoiding smoking cigarettes is extremely important for long-term heart health. So smoking cigarettes is a huge risk factor for heart attacks, heart failure, and stroke in the long term. And kids often follow parent examples. So whether or not a parent smokes or doesn't smoke, telling them not to smoke, and giving them the direct communication from parent to child that smoking is not great for you, and can lead to a lot of heart issues, not just lung cancer, but heart disease. And having that knowledge directly communicated to the child from a parent is something that is powerful. And so I wouldn't underestimate the power of that message, whether the parent smokes or not. Secondhand smoke can be significant. So I think avoiding smoking in the house is certainly important. If you are a parent and you do smoke and you're interested in cutting back or quitting, talking to a doctor about it can be very helpful, because there's numerous resources and different ways to help you cut back or help you quit. Some of them listed here are nicotine patches, nicotine gums, medications, support systems. There's free phone guidance for help quitting on 1-800-QUIT-NOW, which is 784-8669. There's also apps on smartphones that can help you establish your process to help you quit. One of those that is most commonly recommended is something called Quit Start, which is one word, Quit Start, which is the app on any smartphone. So there are many, many ways to help. Don't feel like you're alone in the process. If you're interested in cutting back or quitting altogether, that can help decrease secondhand smoke exposure for your children, and can really benefit their long-term heart health accordingly. Next on the list that I'd like to review is cholesterol. And, when we talk about cholesterol. First, I think it's important to just say, what is cholesterol? So cholesterol is essentially a type of fat that's in the blood that we all have, and we all need some cholesterol for some normal organ functions. However, when cholesterol is abnormally high for several years or decades, this can lead to some clogging and narrowing of blood vessels. And if those blood vessels are in the heart, that can lead to an increased risk of heart attacks. And if those blood vessels are in the brain, that can lead to an increased risk of strokes, where we might have weakness of an arm or a leg or slurred speech as a consequence of a stroke potentially. So the American Academy of Pediatrics has actually, within the last decade, made a recommendation universally that all children should have their cholesterol checked, which is a blood test, should have their cholesterol checked between ages 9 and 11. So at least one check between age 9 and 11. And then another check between age 17 and 21. So even if that one between age 9 and 11 is totally normal, they would recommend repeating one at age 17 to 21. And then obviously adults are checking cholesterol with doctor visits at reasonably frequent intervals because it's an important part of our adulthood health. But want to make sure that everyone knows those updated recommendations from the American Academy of Pediatrics that children should also have their cholesterol screened at those time intervals. Rarely do they recommend checking before age 9. Usually in those scenarios, it's because of a strong family history of early heart disease or strong family history of genetic of high cholesterol that might be genetic. So in general, I think age 9 to 11, for the vast majority of individuals is the general recommendation I want you guys to all remember. And then again, at age 17 to 21. The important thing to know about high cholesterol is if it is high, it is treatable. So dietary recommendations and exercise can often be very helpful. However, sometimes medications are needed, even potentially in children, usually for children who have genetic reasons for their high cholesterol. But nonetheless, that's something that we do and we manage and we see commonly. So it is important to get those screening tests to see if it is high, because it is treatable if it is high. Sleep. I cannot underestimate the importance of sleep. So, not getting enough restful sleep is a risk factor for heart disease in the long term. Teenagers are recommended to get at least 8 hours. Children, the younger the child essentially is, the more sleep that they need. So children certainly are in a little bit of a different category than teenagers. Adults are recommended to get at least 7 hours of sleep per night. And one thing that I think is very important to keep in mind is something called obstructive sleep apnea, because it's very, very common. Obstructive sleep apnea, symptoms of that, essentially snoring is the most common symptom. Feeling very tired despite feeling like you slept a normal number of hours. Taking naps is often a sign that we're just not getting enough restful sleep overnight. So taking naps during the daytime, whether intentional or unintentional, if naps are frequent, that might be another sign that our sleep overnight is not restful enough. And pauses in breathing at night. So usually that's not going to be noted by the individual, but if you notice your child snores frequently and maybe even has pauses in their breathing of 10 seconds, 15-second pauses, between breaths, those could be, or gasping or choking between breaths, waking up because of it. Those can all be common symptoms of sleep apnea and require further evaluation with a doctor. Being overweight is a significant risk factor for obstructive sleep apnea. Some excess weight in the neck area can contribute to that airway being a little bit more narrow when you try to take a good deep breath in. When we're awake, we all tend to take deeper breaths than when we're asleep and take more shallow breaths. And so that's why sometimes sleep can be the time that it can be a little bit more difficult to get those good deep breaths in. And that's why we can sometimes note that snoring or pauses in breathing can occur during those times when we're not getting as much oxygen and breath in as we should. In general, I think talking to a doctor if someone has these symptoms is the most important first step to determine whether a sleep study or other testing might be helpful at that time. Because similarly, sleep apnea is treatable either with devices such as machines like CPAP that can help deliver a little bit more pressure to help that oxygen get all the way fully past those narrowed areas, or other measures that can also help. If sleep apnea is not treated, it can lead to high blood pressure and heart disease in the long term. So it is important to talk to your doctor if you do notice any of these symptoms in your child, because as mentioned, it is treatable. Next, I want to get to heart healthy eating. And so before we talk about sort of heart healthy eating and sort of break it down by meal, I think it's important to start off by saying every family is different. Everyone shops at different places for food. Everyone lives in an area that might have different options and availability of different options. So these are general recommendations. I would say personalize it for what works for you as a family. But these are, kind of just general recommendations. The first that we want to touch on, obviously, is the first meal of the day, which is breakfast. So in general, skipping breakfast, we might think of as being an opportunity to, avoid getting, calories in the morning. But skipping breakfast can actually tell our bodies and our metabolism, which is essentially how our bodies break down the energy we get from foods and processes that to use for energy. Skipping breakfast can actually slow our metabolism. And so it can be more likely that we might retain weight and lead to abnormal weight gain if we skip meals. And so, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but if we're having 3 meals per day, our metabolism is more likely to use the energy from food appropriately, as opposed to sort of conserve the energy and keep those stores going forward. And so I don't recommend skipping breakfast. I do recommend having breakfast and trying to have 3 meals per day. Some options for sort of healthy breakfast options that I have listed there. First, avocado or peanut butter on whole grain bread, I think is a good option. Avocado has a lot of healthy fats in it. Making oatmeal in the morning. If you can make your own oatmeal that has, oats with some milk or some fruit with it, that's terrific. A lot of the packaged oatmeal that is sort of the flavored packaged oatmeal tends to have a lot of added sugars, but in general is not the most unhealthy breakfast you can have. But if you can make your own oatmeal, that's terrific. Fruit in general, especially for people who are more on the grab and go type of breakfast side of things. Grabbing a banana or grabbing an apple or something that's easy to sort of grab and take on your way as you're getting out the door is a great option. Eggs. So in general, eggs are, reasonably healthy, good source of protein, help to make us feel full in the morning. People who have very high cholesterol sometimes are recommended to not have too many eggs per week, as there's, some cholesterol in eggs. But in general, for people who don't have very high cholesterol, it can be a good source of protein in the mornings. Yogurt. So low sugar or no sugar yogurt, preferably. Some yogurts that are advertised to kids, like the Go-Gurts and things that are, very heavily flavored, sometimes have a lot of added sugars in them. So if you don't mind the taste of some of the low sugar or no sugar added yogurts, like the Chobani's or the Oikos or some of those types of brands, or the ones that are just a little bit less in added sugar that still have different flavors kids might enjoy, that can be a good option. And then whole grain cereals with skim or 1% milk are another good option. In general, a lot of the cereal that is advertised to children is quite high in added sugars. So, the Fruity Pebbles, the Fruit Loops, the Trix, those types of things are quite high in added sugars and are not really the types of cereals that are high in whole grains, which usually are high in fiber. And help to make us feel full in the morning. Skim percent, 1% usually have lower fat, do have lower fat than 2% milk or whole milk. So that's why we usually recommend the skim or 1% if you don't mind the taste of those lower fat milks. So in general, the things that for breakfast that I think are should be maybe only occasional and not regular items, not everyday type items for breakfast. Donuts, pancakes, waffles, cereals that are high in those added sugars, like we talked about, the Cinnamon Toast Crunch, the Fruit Loops, things like that, pastries, muffins, all of those types of things are going to be a little bit higher in calories, a little bit higher in saturated fats, and a little bit higher in added sugars typically, which can lead to increased risk of excess weight gain or obesity diabetes, long-term heart disease. And so these are things that I'm not saying avoid and never have, but more so just try to keep these as more occasional items and not, regular items. Now getting towards our second meal of the day for lunch. So for heart healthy eating for children, we have to keep in mind that kids on school days are often having lunch at school, which makes the options in any cafeteria very important to consider. So beverages are super duper duper important. So in general, if we can avoid juice, pop, chocolate milk, or anything ending in aid, like Gatorade, Powerade, lemonade, Kool-Aid, all of those are very high in added or processed sugars. And so those certainly can contribute to excess weight gain or obesity, diabetes, things of that nature. And so if we can have water or regular milk as our main sources of beverages during lunch hour and in general, that is probably the most helpful thing we can do in terms of having some control over what our children are having in the lunch hour at school. Whatever the main option is in the cafeteria, encouraging a fruit or a vegetable or a salad as the side instead of, the chips or the cookies or the candies. And then if we do have the ability to pack a lunch with healthy options, for example, a sandwich on wheat bread or, a salad or a fruit or a vegetable on days that we know the cafeteria options might be less healthy, that's terrific. Obviously, we want to make sure that we're, doing what we can. And if we don't have the ability to pack lunch and we're relying on what the school is offering, that's okay. But just keeping in mind, those options that are at the school. And obviously doing what we can from a big picture standpoint to advocate for healthy options in every school. Next, I'd like to get to dinner. So in terms of dinner, I have a couple of kind of pictures here at the bottom. And before I get to that, there was a message in the chat about the knowledge that Gatorade and Powerade are maybe not great for us. So yes, I think Gatorade and Powerade are packed with added sugars. So they did make the G0, which does not have added sugar, which is a much better option than the regular Gatorade. But it still has a reasonable amount of sodium. So it necessarily isn't the best option for people who might have blood pressure concerns or weight concerns. However, I would say G0 is a much better option than Gatorade, but almost all the things that end in aid that don't have a zero after them are quite high in added sugars, which can contribute to excess weight gain, diabetes, things of that nature. So in general, if our children are really, working hard and are playing sports and are, having a 2-hour basketball practice and have a Gatorade after it, it's not the worst thing in the world. But I think in general, the average individual does not need the Gatorades, the Powerades, those types of sort of sports drinks. In terms of dinner, so as mentioned, obviously everyone has different ability in terms of where they shop, what the options are for where they shop, but these are just sort of kind of general recommendations. The picture, I'd like to start first with the pictures at the bottom here. So the picture on the bottom right there is a kind of picture from a website called myplate.gov, which is essentially a picture of what a healthy plate ideally should look like for dinner in terms of the breakdown of fruits, vegetables, whatever the protein may be, and the grains. And so if we have water or a dairy, like a low-fat milk, like skim or 1% milk with it, those are sort of the best options for our beverage to go with it. And in general, having one full plate and not trying to have, beyond that in terms of, significant seconds or thirds is sort of a good picture, I think, for portion control, but also to sort of see our breakdown of what a plate, ideally should look like. The picture on the left gives us an example of, our peas as our vegetables, our oranges as our fruit there. It looks like somewhat of a croissant there for a grain, and then a grilled chicken, it looks like there for the protein. And in terms of the kind of latter portion here at the top, we I think first should talk about, sort of fast foods or convenient foods. So, avoiding or minimizing fast food obviously is, ideal if we can, because most things we're going to buy from a fast food place are going to be a lot higher in calories and salt and added sugar because they want it to taste great and have you come back frequently and bring your money back to them, as opposed to things that we're making at home, which usually are going to be lower in salt and lower in added sugars or those processed sugars than a lot of those fast food places are. But I do realize that sometimes a convenient meal or a fast meal is needed with our day-to-day life being busy. And so, in general, I think the type of fast food that we're buying is important to consider. So if we're getting fast foods, ideally, I think it's trying to avoid fried foods can be helpful. Anytime we sort of have the typical frying process of, fries or fried chicken, that's going to add more saturated fats or the bad fats to chicken, for example. So, grilled chicken would be more of a lean white meat, and fried chicken would add some of those sort of unnecessary fats to it. Fish or lean white meat like grilled chicken are going to be in general lower in those bad fats than red meats. So if you have the option for a grilled chicken, for example, or fish that isn't fried, it's going to be a better option typically than a burger or, a red meat option most of the time. A wheat wrap would be a better option than a bun. There's a little bit more added sugars in white bread than wheat bread. And wraps usually have less total calories than buns typically. A turkey sandwich on wheat bread from a place that's more of a deli type fast food, like a Subway, for example, will be, healthier than typical kind of burger and fries from more of the burger type fast food places. So there are still sort of fast or convenient, options, if you will, from more of the sort of deli sandwich type places that are going to be in general a little bit lower in calories, lower in added sugars than a lot of, and lower in sodium or salt than a lot of the kind of typical burger and fries type places. Other sort of tips in terms of minimizing some of those added or processed sugars that we can consider for some of our grains are where we look at pastas and rice and breads. So brown rice is going to be a little bit of a healthier option than white rice. Whole wheat pastas are going to be a little bit healthier option than the white noodle pastas. And whole grain breads or multi-grain breads are typically going to be better options than plain white bread, where there's a little bit more added sugars or processed sugars in some of those white breads. And so just some tips and tricks there in terms of how we sort of structure some of the grains or the sides in some of our dinners. There's another message in the chat here that says, what about almond milk as an option for heart health? So great question. So in general, most of the nut related milks, such as almond milk, cashew milk, or things along that nature, are going to be still going to have some calcium in them, which is good for our bone growth. And usually you're going to have lower fat content than like 2% milk or whole milk. So in general, I think most of those types of milk are also good options. But if you like regular milk, I think skim or 1% would be better because it limits the amount of fat. But most of those almond milks or cashew milks, things like that, are going to be low in saturated fat or low in those bad fats while still giving you some of that calcium. So in general, I'd say it's a reasonably good option. Some of them do have some of those added or processed sugars. So you can always take a look at the back label to see how many added sugars there are. If it's less than 10% of your daily value, that's probably reasonable. If it's more than 10%, that's a reasonable amount, and may try to choose one that's a little bit lower in those added or processed sugars. In terms of further kind of dinner options, so healthier dinner options, I think fish in general, if it's fried, that makes it a little bit less healthy, but I think fish is certainly a good option and very healthy and has a lot of good healthy fats. Homemade soups or salads, lean meats like grilled chicken or turkey, fruits and vegetables, homemade soups or homemade chilies are a great way to sort of disguise vegetable intake for kids who maybe are a little bit less interested in having vegetables. I know my mom did that when I was a child. And then trying to have a side salad or a vegetable with dinner every night, I think is a good goal. So regardless of what the main, portion of the meal is, whether it's a meat or a pasta, something like that, trying to have a side salad or a vegetable with dinner on the side every night can be a good strategy. Tips for portion control. So things that research has shown over time that can be helpful for portion control. One is taking smaller bites and making sure we're chewing well. Two, sitting at the table. So if we're sitting in front of a screen like a television, we're much more likely to be distracted and eat more than if we're sitting at the table and focusing on just eating without having those other distracting things with us. Putting the fork down between bites can also be helpful to kind of give us time to make sure we're chewing and processing and digesting and giving us the amount of time for our stomach to give us the feedback that, hey, we're getting full. Not eating straight from the packet. So eating straight from bags of things, we're always going to end up eating more, almost always, than if we put an allotted amount on a plate or in a bowl and then just eat that amount that we allotted from the start. From there, if we do feel full, I think trying to save some for later and not trying to have seconds or thirds in those scenarios. And then removing distractions, as I mentioned. So that can also be our phones. Obviously TV can be one, but phone can be another, certainly. So I think trying to say no phones at the dinner table can be a good rule to try to establish for children, because having that distraction can lead us to not focus on what we're eating and focus on something else and end up eating more. And then paying attention to smell, taste, and texture and what we enjoy about the food that we're eating. All of those things can sort of help us to kind of limit the seconds and thirds that might be unnecessary and help with portion control. Snacks are another obviously important area. So keeping chips, cookies, candies, ice cream as sort of occasional treats and not regular items. I think fruits, vegetables, trail mix that isn't heavily salted, yogurt that's low in sugar or no sugar, whole wheat popcorn, those can certainly be good options for primary snacks. And having those other things that are typically higher in calories, higher in added sugars is just occasional treats and not regular items, maybe a once a week or twice a week kind of thing, as opposed to, regular items. If you're having chips, there's all different types of chips. In general, baked chips or sun chips can be lower in salt and sodium and saturated fat than some of the kind of standard regular brand chips that are usually quite high in salt or sodium. Desserts. All different types of desserts obviously are available. Consider, fruit smoothies or having a low sugar popsicle instead of the cookies or the ice cream to limit some calories, limit some of those added sugars can be good ideas to still have something refreshing, especially on a hot day, but maybe a little bit lower in calories or lower in added sugars than the typical ice cream or cookies. And keep in mind, kids do follow examples of others, and kids will often adopt the eating patterns and habits of their family or of their parents. So setting a good example for them. And if you focus on healthier options, they're more likely to have interest in doing the same. So making sure that you're setting a good example as best as possible can really have effects even after they've, moved out of the home and are at college or living on their own. Knowing what they saw in the home and saw from their parents are going to be sort of examples for what they might consider or have interest in eating in the future. Beverages, I think, are super duper important, as mentioned. So water has no calories, no added sugars. We all need water. And so it's, a great option as our primary beverage. Milk, so skim milk has less fat than 1%, which has less fat than 2%, which has less fat than whole milk. So choose skim or 1% if you can. They all have good amounts of calcium and vitamin D for bone health. So you're not missing out on vitamin D if you cut back on the amount of fat in milk. Avoiding regular pop is probably one of the most important things that I could say. Anything ending in aid, like we talked about, Gatorade, Powerade, lemonade, Kool-Aid, those should all just be very occasional and not regular items. We can see that people who drink 2 or 3 pops a day and then cut back to only have 1 or 2 per week, we can often see very impressive weight loss that's just related to that, even if they don't change their diet and things like that. So pop can really be a big reason for excess added sugars, excess weight gain, and risk of obesity and diabetes. Which then translates into increased risk of heart disease in the long term. Avoiding regular juice as able for those same reasons, trying to dilute juice with water, or just having a rule of trying not to bring regular juice or non-diet pop into the house is probably the most helpful thing we can do, is just not having those regular juices or regular pops in the house. Juice and pop are the #1 source of added or processed sugars in the American diet and are a big contributor to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. So this is a pictorial of what they call rethink your drink. And it gives us an idea of how many teaspoons of added sugars are in each beverage. And you can see water has no teaspoons of added sugars. And then as we go along here, we get more and more teaspoons. And the recommended daily added sugar limit for kids is about 6 teaspoons. And you can see all of these have more than that. So even just having one juice per day, one bottle of juice per day or one soda per day is already more than is recommended for processed sugars in the average child's diet. So you can see, vitamin water that has added sugars in it. So some of the vitamin water have no sugar added, but some of them have quite a bit. Powerade, orange juice, energy drinks, sweetened teas, sodas, and then juice being the most for a 16-ounce juice drink here. So that's really powerful for that image to kind of keep in mind that even one full bottle per day of any one of those is going to be more than they recommend for any child in a day. Good beverage options, like we talked about, water, skim milk, or flavoring water with a no sugar added or sugar-free flavoring, such as a Crystal Light packet, can be a great option. Avoid sugary beverages if you can, and if you do offer them, try to limit to 1 to 2 sugary beverages per week and just have it as sort of that occasional treat. Blood pressure. So we start checking blood pressure at age 3 at every child's pediatric visit. High blood pressure puts more stress on our blood vessels. And over years and decades, that can lead to basically plaques building up in blood vessels that can cause them to narrow over time, which can lead to heart attacks, strokes, or even death. And so high blood pressure is very important to recognize and very important to treat if it is present, because we don't feel high blood pressure unless it's crazy, crazy, crazy high. Sometimes we might have, symptoms, but the vast majority of the time, high blood pressure is something that we don't feel. And so it's called the silent killer for a reason. But high blood pressure is treatable. So going to a doctor at least once a year and getting a blood pressure check as part of that visit is very important. For children ages 13 and up, 120/80 is considered sort of normal blood pressure, and 130s would be considered sort of high, and 140s or 90s for that bottom number is definitely high. Maintenance of a healthy weight. So in the 1970s, 5% of children in the US were obese, and now 17% of children are obese. 1 out of every 3 children in the US is overweight or obese. And the biggest changes over that time from the 1970s until now are the availability of sugary beverages like the pop, juice, sports drinks, chocolate milks, availability of fast food all over the place, typically that is very high in calories. And then screen time and technology obviously is a big one. Less time being active and playing and more time on screens, which is usually sedentary time. All of the activity and eating beverage recommendations we reviewed can help with this. So I think focusing on what we eat and what we do for activity is the most important thing to sort of keep in mind when we talk about maintaining a healthy weight. So that 1 hour a day of physical activity for children is probably the most important thing we can talk about. Avoiding excess screen time is recommended. So 2 hours or less per day of non-homework related screen time is recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics as sort of a good general limit to limit our children so they're not spending the whole day that they're not in school on screens for entertainment purposes. Avoiding screens during meal times, as distracted eating can lead to eating more, as we mentioned as well. Now, getting into signs or symptoms that could indicate a heart problem. So we talked a lot about things that can increase our risk for heart disease in the long term, in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and starting those good habits in childhood, because I think that's the most important thing. But sometimes we have heart issues, such as being born with a heart defect or developing heart disease in childhood, which may not be as common, but are important to know about what to look for so that you know what to look for to tell your doctor about. So signs or symptoms that could indicate a heart problem. 1, so if your doctor hears a heart murmur, obviously that's something that they're going to need a stethoscope to listen for, and you have to be at a doctor to appreciate. But if they hear a heart murmur, sometimes that can indicate underlying heart issues. Many times in childhood, heart murmurs can be innocent and just be reflective of the normal flow through a structurally normal heart. But different types of murmurs are important to appreciate and have a heart doctor listen if needed. Chest pain during physical activity. So if children have pain when they're running or when they're going upstairs or things that are active when their heart rate is higher and they have pain during those times, certainly a reason to talk to a doctor. Fainting or passing out or losing consciousness is a big one that certainly we want to make sure that it's not related to any heart problem. Feeling your heart racing, almost like the feeling like you're exercising even when you're not exercising. So your heart just sort of suddenly going fast even when you're at rest. That's something we call palpitations. Swelling in your feet or ankles could be a sign of congestive heart failure. Shortness of breath could also be another potential sign, which many times in children is not related to the heart and could be asthma related or other things, but certainly we want to think thoroughly about it. And then it's important to have healthcare access and routine checkups with a pediatrician at least every year, and more often in infancy, to screen for these problems, not just heart related, but other things that can be related to our big picture health for our children. So thank you very much for your time. I appreciate it. And I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have. I see that there's, we had addressed a couple of the comments in the chat already, but happy to take any questions that anyone has. And thank you very much for letting me join you guys today.
Wow. You certainly provided us with a lot of information, Doctor. And if there are any questions or that have not already been asked on social media or in the chat, we can start to entertain those questions. But before we do, again, I want you to remember to share this information on your social media platforms with your family, with your friends, your church members, at a parent meeting, because we certainly want to make sure that our children are as healthy as they can be so that they can live their best life while they're children, but remembering that the habits that they start now will help them to live their best lives as adults. So again, thank you so very much. We do have a question that's in the chat, Doctor. It says, well, first of all, it was an amazing presentation. They said, thank you so much. But they said, what about the use of herbs to help promote healthy heart?
Oh, that's a good question. So, in general, there's all different types of herbs. So, I think, I would say in general, we don't need added herbs. If we're having some of those healthy, balanced diets and integrating some vegetables, integrating some fruits, I don't think that we need added herbs necessarily. There's certainly are some herbs that are just not studied by the FDA. And so we don't know the concentration of certain ingredients in them. And so we can get into some muddy waters there if we're taking things that are maybe over-the-counter herbs that we don't know how much concentrations of certain ingredients there are in them fully, or what the side effects of those can be. So in general, I would say if we're having a reasonably balanced diet, I think a multivitamin per day, a one-time multivitamin per day is typically not harmful for school-age children or adolescents, and can give us some of those vitamins that we maybe don't get if we're not having enough vegetables or nutritious things in our diet. But in general, I think it's not necessary or not additive for the average person. Yeah.
Okay. Did anyone else have a question? Because I have a couple I wanted to ask Doctor.
We have a hand raised, Miss Bettina.
Okay. Open your mic and ask your question, please.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It was a great presentation. My question is about when babies are born with that hole in their hearts, and a lot of times they'll say that it's going to close up on their own. So is that hereditary, and is it more common now that doctors know about it and then in the future, in the past?
Great question. Great question. So there are all different types of heart defects that babies can be born with. I would say over time, we've gotten better at appreciating different types of heart murmurs that can lead us to say, hey, we should get a heart ultrasound to look at the details of the heart to determine what it looks like. Having that sort of described hole in the heart is usually a hole either between the top chambers of the heart or a hole between the bottom chambers of the heart, where there's usually a wall that separates those chambers. And if those holes are very small and in locations that are areas that grow in well, where the heart muscle typically grows in well, then we usually don't need procedures to help close those defects. But when defects are quite large, or when they're in particular locations that just don't close off well on their own, then we usually have a better idea as to whether we might need surgery or other types of procedures to close those defects. So it's a complex answer to your question, because it all sort of depends on the location of the hole and how big the hole is. But in general, the first sign sometimes that we have a heart defect is just a doctor listening with a stethoscope and hearing a certain type of heart murmur or sort of swishing sound when we listen with the stethoscope. So sometimes we have no signs or symptoms of it in a child, and sometimes it's just us listening that we appreciate those concerns.
Mm-hmm. And is it more hereditary, or is it just now is more common?
Good question. Most of those types of heart defects are not as strongly hereditary. There are slight increased risks of heart defects in siblings or first degree relatives of people who are born with a heart defect, but for most heart defects, it is not a significantly increased risk. So, about 1% of babies are going to be born with some heart defect, and about a quarter of those are going to require surgery at some point. So it is common. We do see heart defects a lot. But if you have a first degree relative, a sibling or a parent who was born with a heart defect, it increases the risk that there might be a heart defect in a subsequent sibling, for example. But it's not a significantly increased risk for the vast majority of heart defects. It's still a very low risk that just because you have one child who might be born with a defect, the risk of having another child born with a heart defect in the majority of situations is still quite low.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yes, of course.
Does anyone else have any questions? Doctor, I'd like to know, because we're seeing more situations where younger athletes are having issues with their heart. Mm-hmm. When do we start talking to our children about heart health, and how should we start the conversation?
That's a great point. I think in general, in the area of technology and social media and news sharing and some high profile cases, obviously, I think it's important to know that this has been happening for forever, that some children have been having cardiac events during exercise or even while asleep or things like that, where the heart sometimes can go into a sudden arrhythmia or can suddenly not get enough blood flow if there is a particular problem with the setup of the arteries that feed the blood to the heart. So in general, I would say, if we are going to our doctor's visits and they're asking the appropriate questions about family history and they're taking a listen to the heart and we're basically checking on all the things we normally would do for a typical physical, we are being able to screen for a lot of those problems and catch a lot of those problems before they become issues. So I think going to our routine doctor's visits and having those normal questions asked and having our heart listened to is probably the most helpful thing we can do to screen and prevent issues ahead of time. In general, I would say talking to children about heart health, I think focusing more on building healthy habits is probably the most helpful thing we can do, and saying, hey, this is something that's really good for our hearts in the long term, without maybe focusing on maybe scary things that might be scary for them. I think we can get into a lot of trouble if we take one bad case or one scary thing that happened to someone and sort of say, well, I never want to play basketball because that person had something terrible happen to them while they played basketball. I think we have to take everything on a case-by-case basis and see why events happened, and know that sometimes there are very, very rare heart defects or very, very rare arrhythmias that sometimes can happen at any age. I know obviously LeBron's son was a very high profile case of a cardiac arrest that happened while he was on the basketball court practicing for USC. And I know they didn't divulge all of the details of what happened to him, but said that they found that he had a congenital heart defect. So he was born with some heart problem that was previously likely, unrecognized, that now it sounds like has had some procedure to help treat it. And now he's back on the court and playing, which is terrific. And the fact that he was able to get through that is phenomenal. So all of that to say is, I don't think there's a particular age where it needs to be across the board discussed. But I do think if your children have questions about heart health or about some of those maybe high profile cases of things that have happened, it can be very helpful to just say, hey, there are very rare things that happen sometimes. That as long as we're going to the doctor, they're taking a listen to our hearts, and they're asking the appropriate questions about our family history, and we're doing the appropriate screening we need to do, then we're doing all we should be doing. Because exercise in general is very beneficial for our heart health. So I think that having that sort of general approach is probably best in childhood.
Okay. thank you so very much for all the wonderful information that you shared. I'm sure that we all heard some things about our habits, our eating habits, our drinking habits that we may need to change in order to be able to make sure that our children are eating appropriately and drinking appropriately. And so if the shoe fits like me, so just stay out and then start making those changes. So thank you so very much. And once again, we encourage you to share today's webinar in your social media network. And we want to just make sure that you are sharing this wonderful and valuable information, because it's a waste of time if we're on here and we give you the information and it helps you, but it just lives there. It doesn't help everybody. We want to change the culture of our community, our families and our communities, so that we are having better health. So again, let's talk about some of the upcoming events. On Monday, February 26th at 6 p.m., we want you to please join Ask Mary and Pat, their Zoom, and they can give you many answers with the questions regarding Medicaid, sometimes answers regarding Medicare. And I think they have a special guest this coming up week, so that may have some information for you about taxes. Also, the free VITA income tax services at the Hill Hernando began on the 17th, and they run until April the 11th. Their walk-ins are welcome. The classes are usually like Wednesday and Thursday from 5 to 8 p.m. and Saturdays from 10 to 12 p.m. Again, that's free. And I know that some of us want to go to the other tax preparers and so that we can get our money back right now. But if you can afford to wait and get all of your money, this is a wonderful option for you. And if you have more details or to schedule an appointment, please call 662-298-3584. Then on March the 2nd, the Mid-South Churches is having their 6th annual Women and Girls Conference. You can get more information about that by calling the same number, 662-298-3584. Finally, remember our next third Wednesday Parent Resource Chat is March the 20th, and it's going to be on nutrition and kidney disease in children. Although kidney disease is not very common, it can have a significant effect on their health, and we want to explore some key points. So you may learn more about us and what's going on at the Hill Hernando, the Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation by going to www.oakhillregionalcdc.com and www.healthykidsms.org. Once again, we acknowledge our board chair, Jennifer Garrett, and our executive director, Dr. Michael O. Minor. This has been a production of the Oak Hill Regional Community Development Corporation, belonging, building, and bridging in the Mid-South region and across the state of Mississippi. And thank you very much for joining us. Those of you who are on Zoom, if you can stay around for a few minutes, that would be wonderful.